Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. I did a fun thing today. I decided that I would sit down and try to predict what the first 30 levels of the Allied Pacific campaign are going to be. I'll do a Japanese campaign as well, prediction video, and kind of just show off my thoughts and what I think could be there. The Japanese campaign, I think, is going to be a lot harder to do, both for me and obviously for Darkflow, because there's just so much more limited options in regards to what there is. And doing 30 levels is already really difficult for the Americans, let alone for the Japanese, who again just had such significantly less options and less production overall. So anyway, here is what I ended up with. I'm going to mention again, not again, but I'm going to mention briefly that I decided that it would probably make more sense to base this on the campaign being the entire Pacific theater, not just the early war, not just the late war. And the reason for this is that I just think that if they were to split it up, then we're going to get two campaigns. And I don't think there should be more campaigns being split up like that because that's more queues, more players not existing within the same area. But also, it's going to be a lot of repeat stuff. I think it's just best if they combine the campaigns together, and we just kind of have to deal with the slight inaccuracies of weapons that were designed in 1944 being used in Guadalcanal or something like that. It's not going to be that extreme, and I don't think it's going to be that awkward, but just bear with me in regards to that kind of stuff. It's a little awkward, but I really do think that it's best if we take that kind of historical inaccuracies on the chin in exchange for having a little bit more balanced of a campaign and not having to do like several different campaigns of grinding and things like that. So anyway, for the starting weapons and starting gear for the Allies here, we have the Rifleman M1903 Springfield, the Sniper M1903 Springfield Sniper, and the Assaulter one with a shotgun that I did put a little mentionable here to have the Slamfire. I think Slamfire should already be in the game. I don't know why it's not on the other Winchester, but I would really like to see the Slamfire put into the game. Just really increase the rate of fire of the shotguns. I think it'd be really cool. I think it'd be a lot of fun to just implement that into the game. Like you just hold down, your trigger and it just fires really quickly. Really increase that rate of fire in shotguns. I just think that'd be really fun. I don't really think it would unbalance things, but I made a little note just because that doesn't exist right now. I'd like to see it exist. As for the Springfields, it's pretty well known. Like the Marines were stuck with Springfields, especially early on in the war. The Pacific Theater was pretty much an afterthought, at least for the United States. It was very much so Germany first, so a lot of the good gear and good equipment and stuff was sent to the Western Front over in Europe and North Africa rather than to the Pacific at first. So anyway, your first unlock is going to be your tank. Obviously, I didn't actually put Tanker 1. It's going to be the LVTA. So that was it's an amphibious landing vehicle. It's one of your starting reserve vehicles in War Thunder. I figured this makes a lot of sense. You're trying to sell that kind of idea of being Marines, being in the Pacific Theater. Maybe they can even have some landings. Maybe if you're in this, you spawn in the water or something like that. That'd be kind of cool. But it's just got a little 37 millimeter cannon on it. It's nothing extreme. It's basically a really lightly armored Stuart. I went back and forth a lot on between this being the starting vehicle and the M2A4 light tank being the starting vehicle. Both of them were used in the early wars, and the LVT was used further on through the war. But the M2A4 is definitely used early on. I think that's the predecessor to the Stuart. Anyway, regardless, they both have really small cannons. Tanks are going to be kind of a much less used thing in the Pacific Theater. You're going to see if you're peaking, the Sherman's not unlocked until level 30, and that's really late because you're fighting on islands. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to have big vehicles. Mobility just didn't really matter. A lot of tanks were just used as bunkers and infantry support as opposed to how they were used on the Western Front and the Eastern Theater and the Eastern Front, where there were these big tank battles, right, at Kursk. And, tanks were really widely used for flanking maneuvers and for breakthroughs and things like that. They just weren't really used like that in the Pacific because there's just not room to. So I think that they're just going to be a little bit more less used, and I kind of reflected that in my campaign here. Now for Engineer 1, you're going to get the M1 carbine. Was used, obviously, not really shocking there. Engineers need to be unlocked early. First fighter here is the P-39 Air Cobra. This was not used. It's not a carrier-based aircraft, so it's going to be kind of weird if there's like island map where there wasn't really any like launch points or anything like that. But again, you just kind of have to deal with these kind of inconsistencies. P-39 was not by any means like a great aircraft. It was fine. It was good, but it wasn't anything that was super amazing or groundbreaking, right? And I think that we want to start with those kind of smaller planes. And then we'll kind of ramp up the Japanese. I think generally I've kind of set this up where the Japanese are going to have an edge at basically every level in terms of especially fighters, because that I think is going to be a good way to balance the factions and try to help them out at least a little bit in that regard. Flame Trooper 1s. Flame Troopers are going to be unlocked really early. I want them to be unlocked early. We're going to be in the jungles. We're going to be fighting in these kind of close quarters areas. I think it makes sense for a Flame Trooper to be unlocked earlier rather than later. Then we have the Radio Operator 1s with the Enfield 1917. Historically speaking, these were the American Enfield variants. They were used by the Americans. By World War II, they were used pretty reservedly. Really artillery, not artillery like radio operator type groups, but more just kind of like the artillery units and the rear echelon units and things like that were using those. But I kind of wanted to sneak these in. This could be like a Winchester or something like that, maybe the M1895 that we have. But I think this actually could make a level of sense. And then we have for the medics, the M42. This was like I can't remember what it was called. It was like a home defense or something like that. It was a really weird looking gun. It was not used very much. It was very, very rarely used. It was actually used by partisans, I believe, and it was dropped in like partisans. In France, it was used, I think, in the Philippines. Maybe we could have some Philippine battles, and this would make a little bit more sense. But I figured the medics should have just some kind of little shitty, dinky SMG unlocked pretty early on there for them. And then the anti-tank 1 getting the M1 bazooka. I thought about the Boys AT rifle, but I decided to go with the bazooka. It's going to be all light tanks anyway, and I think it makes more sense just to unlock the M1 bazooka early on. The Japanese can have something that's equally effective. Again, I think tanks are going to be a lot less effective in the Pacific campaign. Again, I mirrored and set up the campaign in that capacity. Then you get the M2A4 light tank. These things were used pretty extensively, at least early on in the war, and especially in Guadalcanal, there was some fighting going on with these things, so it's kind of where I went with that. And then you get a Browning Auto 5 shotgun. This thing is in the game. It is not in any campaigns, but it is in the game. It was in the closed beta testing of Normandy. I really wish it was in the campaign right now. I love this gun. One of my favorite guns in Enlisted, actually, from way back in the closed beta days. So I really hope this gets added. And I don't really think it's unbalanced. I think it's just kind of a fun gun. You get an automatic shotgun, only 5 rounds, kind of goes along with this slam fire shotgun. Gunner 1 getting the BAR-A2, pretty logical there. I don't know why the Bren is like the starting gun for the Americans in Normandy. I think it would just make more sense to be Gunner 1, Gunner 2, Gunner 3 of BAR-A1, BAR-A2, and then the 1919 or something. I don't like the Bren at all. I don't think the Bren should be used by the Americans. So we're going with the BAR-A2. Your first attack plane, the PBY Catalina. I don't know. This was more of a scout plane, I think. I don't really know enough about planes to get like a good early dive bomber type deal, but this kind of can work. I don't know. Maybe you guys have a better idea for an early attack plane. Let me know in the comments down below. Level 13, the M3A1 grease gun. I figured this made sense. Put the grease gun in there before the Thompson, before we start unlocking stuff like the M50 Rising. So there you go. Mortar 1s. Mortars are stupid, but they have to be in the game. So there you go. Tanker 2 getting the M3A1 Stuart or an M5A1. I don't know, whichever the most balanced one would be. Again, I don't have a PhD in War Thunder. I just put Stuart. Stuart was used a lot in the Pacific campaign. They used the canister shell actually a lot. I don't know if we'll get a canister shell. I'd like to see that, but it might be really broken, so maybe it wouldn't be that good of an idea. But and then Fighter 2 getting the Wildcat. I assume this is probably where the Japanese would get their 0, because again, I want them to get outclassed. I want the Americans to be outclassed, generally speaking. You're not like you're getting absolutely slaughtered. You have a chance, but I would like to see the Americans kind of losing that air battle in the way that they don't in Normandy, to give a little bit different kind of feel, right? In Normandy, it's kind of the Allies have a vehicle advantage and the Axis have a kind of infantry advantage, and that kind of evens out. So I'd like it to be flipped in the Pacific, where the Americans have a little bit of advantage on the ground, while the Axis, the Japanese, have a little bit of advantage in the air. And so again, hopefully we can kind of reflect that with the campaign. Sniper 2 is getting the Winchester Model 70 sniper variant. This was actually used in the Pacific. It's one of the only places it was used in the Pacific during World War II. So I'm really excited for this. I really hope this gets added. I think it's a cool gun. Then Rifleman 2 getting the M1 Garand, the Marines finally getting the M1 Garands that the Army's had forever. Flame Trooper 2 is getting their M2 flamethrower. Machine Gunner 2 is getting the Johnson LMG. This was effectively kind of like an FG-42 type weapon. I'd like to see this on a machine gunner rather than on the infantry, right, that the FG-42 is on. I don't want to see the FG-42 type weapons on infantry. I think that should be rifleman type weapons, not machine gun weapons. So there you go, Johnson LMG. Attacker plane, the SBD Dauntless. It's already in the game. Makes sense. It can have its same armament. That'll be good. Assaulter 2 is getting the M50 Rising. This is currently a premium squad in the game, but this was used in the Pacific fairly extensively over the Thompson. The Thompson had a lot of problems, and we're going to see it down here just because should be included. But the Thompson had a lot of problems that I was reading about in the Pacific where it jammed a lot. The Thompson was a fantastic weapon during World War II, but it was just very prone to jamming, as a lot of weapons were in the Pacific. So the Marines, used the M50 Rising, and again, they were very under-equipped, so throwing in the Rising there. Then an M3A1 Stuart with a flamethrower. Very cool. Engineer 2s with the M2 carbine. The F6F Hellcat fighter plane being unlocked, giving the Allies a counter to the Zero. And then the Japanese would probably get a better version of the Zero or whatever their later fighter planes were. Anti-Tank 2 is getting the M9 bazooka to absolutely annihilate anything that is thrown at them. Sniper 3 is getting the Sniper M1 Garand. M1 Thompson that I mentioned before, and then the Machine Gunner 3 is getting the Stinger LMG that I'm sure a lot of you guys are really excited for. I really hope this gun gets added. I don't really see how you could possibly add it. Maybe it'll get added as like a gold order weapon rather than like a mainline weapon. Maybe that would make more sense, but I would like to see it just as a main weapon instead of the 30 cal. If you guys don't know, this was basically Marines that ripped off aircraft weapons, like machine guns that were used on aircraft, and basically tried to figure out how to jury rig it into being like a serviceable infantry weapon. There was only like 6 of them made, and most of them made towards the later half of the war. So I just think it'd be a really cool weapon. Maybe it's better off as a gold order weapon as are some of the other ones. And there's definitely some gold order weapons that could be put into this campaign, but I would like to see it. Maybe it'll just be the 1919 A6, and maybe that would be better, but I put the Stinger. And then the M4A2 Sherman, of course. Again, the Shermans weren't really used that much. They were used later on, but a lot of the time the Shermans just weren't able to actually land on a lot of the islands because they were just too heavy. They would just sink right into the sand. I think famously at Iwo, at the Battle of Iwo Jima, they sunk just right into the sand. I might be thinking of a different battle, but yeah, regardless, I think that tanks should be kind of less prominent in this campaign, and I think this should be a pretty infantry focused campaign, running through the jungle, fighting infantry battles, as opposed to just kind of these really heavy tank campaigns that we see a lot in the other campaigns. So there you go, guys. That's kind of my little video that I decided to do. I'm sure you guys have a lot of thoughts. I'm sure you guys disagree with a lot of the stuff on here, and that's perfectly fine. Let me know in the comments down below your guys' thoughts on my campaign prediction here. Let me know what you guys want to see. Let me know what you guys think we will see, and let me know what you guys think the Japanese will be getting on the Axis side of this campaign. Let me know all that in the comments below. Remember, as always, you can join our community Discord, and you can follow me twitch.tv/HeyQuadro. The link for all that stuff is in the description below, and I will see you guys next time. Take it easy.